After the last episode where I created the insert hole, the last major step on the router table is to create the mitre slot into the tabletop. Now I'm going to cheat a bit here and install an aluminium mitre slot, as the tabletop is made of MDF and I can see myself damaging an MDF mitre slot, leading to inaccuracy. I have already drawn the location for this underneath the tabletop early on, so I check the measurements and then mark out where it needs to be on the top. Before proceeding, I get my trusty piece of offcut and prepare to do a test route so I can determine where I need to position the guide when doing the route. I make a note of these in my trusty notebook and then reposition the guide across one of the rounded corners from a previous test route, as I will be needing this a bit later on when shaping the aluminium mitre slot. I also need to fine tune the depth of the route so the mitre slot is recessed flush to the tabletop. This takes a couple of passes, however I also need to add another guide so I can make another pass, as the aluminium mitre slot is wider than my router bit. This doesn't take too long, and now I'm ready to move on to the table to create the required slot. I clamp the track down in place and then mark its outline so I know its exact placement. I then move it across so I can use its straight edge to measure against when I place the guide down and clamp it into position. With all that in place, I can now remove the slot, as it's going to get in the way of the router. I put some blue painter's tape on each end of the table and I'm ready to go. I'm making the route over 3 passes, increasing the depth as I go, each time using the built-in guide stops in the router. You can see when I'm reaching the end of the table, as when I cut through the red gum it stands out over the MDF sawdust. After repositioning the guide, I continue on and make the widening route with 3 more passes. And just like magic, the aluminium mitre slot fits in perfectly. However, it's not exactly flush, so I spend a bit of time sanding it down to get the desired results. I use my metal ruler as a test to see if it's flush or not. Eventually, it is perfect. Now that's over, I clamp it down so I can mark out where I need to cut it. I'm going to use this saw guide to help me keep the hacksaw straight while I trim it down. I bring back my trusty piece of offcut and line up the end of the track in the groove I made when doing the test route earlier. I had the foresight to do the test route across the rounded edge of the test piece. This allows me to now shape the end of the track to the round edge, so when I put it in the table it's going to line up nicely with the tabletop edges. With the track now the correct length, I need to drill some holes into it so it is properly fastened to the table. I've decided 5 screws will be used. I'll add a hole on the other end, the same distance as the original, and then another hole between the centre and the end on both sides. Now I know they are not symmetrically placed, however the only other option was to center the track on the middle hole and then trim both ends. However, this seems like a waste of track that I can use in another project in the future. After drilling and countersinking the new holes, I clamp it down on the table and start pre-drilling each hole and then screwing it to the tabletop. Once I've done all 5 screws, I remove them again and also the track, as I want to seal the MDF before leaving the track in there permanently. I use my chisel to trim the MDF that was raised from the screws, and then use my air compressor to blow out all the MDF dust in the groove and also in the insert hole. To seal the MDF, I'm using a 50-50 mixture of wood glue and water. I'm doing this to both the track slot and the insert hole, including the chamfered edge underneath. The reason I'm doing this is to prevent moisture from entering the tabletop and causing it to swell and warp. I end up giving it 2 coats of this 50-50 mix, and the next afternoon I come back and give these surfaces a very light sanding to remove any furry bits. I give the table another blast with the air compressor to get rid of that dust, and then when I was putting the track into the slot I could feel it was a smidgen long on the edge. So I took the time to file it back just a little bit more. With that out of the way, I can now put the track in permanently, and I've got to say I really like how it looks. So let's revisit the router insert. Here's the one from earlier, and you can see the cracks that formed after my last test. It fits nicely into the table, however, I decided to remake it, seeing as I had spare perspex. And if I'm making one, I may as well make 2. Seeing as I now have 2 routers, I made one for each of them. Here is my 1/2-inch router, and these are the 2 screws that were located in the centre. I removed them and I have 2 countersunk M5 screws to go in their place. And this is how I made the new router insert instead of 4 holes. Before I can put the insert on, you know what needs to be done. Oh yeah. take it off. Nice and slowly. With the protective film removed, this fits on nicely, and then it's time to remove the other piece of protective film. Oh yeah. All the way. It looks freaking awesome, and you can see how easily it fits into the insert hole. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you a finished router table. Here's the table with the 1/4" router resting in place, and I've also got the mitre gauge from my table saw here, and you can see it glides along nicely in that track. The things I can do with this router table are almost endless, and I'm glad I chose to make this as my first project. It's a great feeling to have made it this far. So let's take the router table for a test drive. Here's a push stick I made for my table saw, and I have a rounding bit on the router that I'm going to use to smooth out the square edges. I'm being very careful here with my fingers, as a spinning sharp blade could do lots of damage in a split second. Anyways, I'm very happy with the end result, and I'm happy that the router table is actually functional. I've still got the fence to build, along with the accessories such as a guard, a featherboard, a vacuum attachment, and a safety power switch. Stay tuned to the next video where I start working on the fence. I hope you've enjoyed my journey making the router table and are looking forward to the future projects I can make with it. Let me know what you think of the router table in the comments. Until next time, bye!